Okay, moving on to Article 5, whether sacred doctrine is nobler than the other sciences. Of course, for a believing Christian, it is. Why? Well, obviously, its subject matter is God, who's the highest being. Therefore, it's the most noble science. It's nobler than metaphysics, which also treats of God, but not, of course, as the subject matter of metaphysics, but as the cause of being, which is the subject matter of metaphysics. But this science studies God in the light of divine knowledge. Therefore, it's more noble. And the purpose of the science is ultimately practical, which is eternal bliss. The ultimate end of the science is not, strictly speaking, knowledge, but salvation. And therefore, it's more nobler in its end. But what you wouldn't necessarily think is its nobility coming from its level of certitude. You think mathematics might be more certain than sacred science. After all, how many people have gone to war over 2 + 2 = 4? There's no disagreements there, but there's disagreements on the nature of the Trinity and the relation of Christ's human and divine nature, and the efficacy of the sacraments. These things, if they were so certain, why would there be wars fought over them? Why would there be such schisms within the churches, the Protestant Reformation and the like? Well, that's a prima facie argument, you might say, against the certainty of it, but I don't think it works. Just because a science is certain doesn't mean people can't disagree on them, and it's a matter of obedience when it comes to the faith. It's not a matter of getting the knowledge right, like in some Gnostic religions. So St. Thomas says there's greater certitude because the human reason can err where the divine reason cannot. You might say, well, wait a minute. We don't have the divine reason. We can err in trying to figure out what the divine reason is telling us. Maybe that's what accounts for all the disagreements and bloodshed. But insofar as you're an obedient son of the Catholic Church and you accept its teachings, it's not too difficult, intellectually speaking, to know with certainty that when you utter a doctrine, it's true. You may not have the certainty of understanding it well or even adequately, and in relation to all the other things you know and understand, both supernatural and natural, but the truth itself is known to be certain with the most certitude. Okay. Yeah, so he actually says this pretty clearly in the reply to objection 1. Hence, the fact that some happen to doubt about articles of faith is not due to the uncertain nature of the truths, but due to the weakness of human intelligence. There it is. Okay. All right, moving on to our next article, Article 8, I believe. Whether sacred doctrine is a matter of argument. Well, yeah, you might think, on the one hand, of course it's not. It's simply a matter of obedience to what is revealed. And he says, if it's a matter of argument, the argument is either from authority or from reason. If it's from authority, that's unbefitting the dignity because authority is the weakest argument in normal things, in philosophy, for instance. But if it's from reason, this is unbefitting because human reason doesn't know these things. And if human reason did know them, then faith wouldn't have merit. So St. Thomas says, therefore, it's not a matter of argument. It's a pretty clever objection there. But it is a matter of argument. And so St. Thomas says, it's not so much that the doctrine will argue to try to prove its principles. That's something more you see in the Summa Contra Gentiles. And in that text, it's not just proof, right? We talked about this. It's probable arguments in support of the truths of the faith, likely probable arguments, and also arguments to prove that claims against the faith are not either true or not necessarily true. Okay, but that's not what he's doing in the Summa. He says it doesn't argue in proof of its principles, which are the articles of faith, but from them it goes on to prove something else. And of course, that's what's going on in this immense work here, is beginning with and always presupposing the truths of the Apostles' Creed, for instance, the basic truths of the faith, the innumerable, complex, many sub and parallel and correlative truths can be shown to be the case deriving from those first principles, the articles of faith. Okay. Now, in reply to the argument about the argument from authority, this is an important point. The argument from authority, when you just sort of say, Aristotle says, that doesn't prove a philosophical point. It makes it likely because of Aristotle's great ability to sort of articulate the most fundamental common sense truth for all time for us. Say, Cardinal Newman said to think at all is to be an Aristotelian. But what about for sacred doctrine? Does it work the same? And St. Thomas says, although the argument from authority based on human reason is the weakest, yet the argument from authority based on divine revelation is the strongest. And of course, the reason is because it's the authority of God and His Church. So, theologians are not simply philosophers who work with different material, different content, because ultimately the act of faith and obedience is where the buck stops. But where for the philosopher, it doesn't stop in obedience. Philosopher qua philosopher, it stops with the way things are, reality itself, the truth of things, as known by human reason through investigation and inquiry. Sometimes the philosopher has to submit when there's a question that he can't resolve, and when he's going towards a direction against the faith. A Christian philosopher, of course, would then submit his reason to a higher authority, but not the philosopher qua philosopher. Although even Socrates never disobeyed his daimon, who gave him commands not to do things, and he also never questioned certain things and never inquired whether they were true. He just knew them to be true. The existence of the soul, its immortality, the need to pursue virtue as the point of life, care for the soul as the main goal of everything. The most important thing you could do is care for your soul. He never disputed this in any of the dialogues. There was some kind of judgment in the afterlife, and that the investigation of truth through inquiry was the greatest human activity possible. Okay, so stay tuned, and we'll finish up the rest of the articles and questions in our last commentary for Lesson 8.